Thank you for everybody to come to the privacy talk. This time I'm a great honor to invite Professor Susan from DC. I think this year is in the beginning to collaborate in the multinational approach for the data governance. I'm very happy to explore this agenda with Professor Susan. So yeah, Susan, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
So first of all, let me make an introduction of her. Susan Ariel Aaronson is a research professor of international affairs and the director of the Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub. Aaronson conceives of and directs the hub, which aims to educate policymakers and the press and the public about domestic and international data governance issues, from digital trade to the public governance. Aaronson is also a cross-disciplinary fellow and affiliate at GW's the Institute for International Economic Policy, the Institute for Science and Technology Policy, and the Singular Center. She is also a senior fellow at the think tank Center for International Governance Innovation in Canada, where she publishes much of her research. Aaronson is currently directing the project on mapping data governance and writing on comparative advantage in data, treated as a tool to counter disinformation, data and national security, and America's approach to simulating AI. Her research has been funded by Hewlett, McCarthy, Koch, Ford, and Rockefeller foundations, governments such as Netherlands, US, and Canada, and the UN, ILO, and the World Bank, and the US corporations, including Ford Motors and Levi Strauss. Dr. Aaronson is frequent speaker and writer on international economic developments. She regularly writes on op-eds for Barron's. Aaronson has commented on economics, on marketplace, all things considered, Morning Edition, NBC, CNN, the BBC, and PBS. Previously, Aaronson was a guest scholar in economics at the Brookings Institute from 1995 to 1999, and the research fellow at the World Trade Institute from 2008 to 2012. Aaronson was also the Carvalho Fellow at the Government Accountability Project and the Minerva Chair at the National War College. So yeah, great to have a call this moment, Aaronson, this times. So let's move on to today's agenda. I'm one of the fan of your great YouTube channel at the Data Gov Hub, because this, I was working on the policy making, very few experiences, but it was a very inspiration with me. So that's why your education interview channel is a very great, knowledgeable for me and also the other international viewers. So my question is, I'm wondering, why did you start these activities, and what are you planning to do from this year? Because we are in a COVID, we are not able to gather together. So what are you planning?
So we hope to do more on helping people understand how data is challenging how we think about what trade agreements should do, as example. So right now I've been writing on, should trade agreements govern disinformation? And really, so what? You know, if there's language in trade agreements like CPTPP and RCEP and even DIPA that talk about privacy. They set a floor, right? But they don't say much about interoperability. They say, enforce your own laws. And they say the same thing for spam. And I'd imagine at some point they'll say the same thing for disinformation. And maybe that's great if they start to include those kind of provisions. But Ultimately, what really matters when we're talking about privacy is
Mhm.
addressing the business model that underpins why we all feel so threatened that so many companies have aspects of so much of our personal data, and that can have such a positive and or negative effect on our daily lives, our control over our lives, whether or not we get a loan or whether or not we get access to information. And at some point, the world has to address that because many of these companies, the 3 from China
Mhm.
and the 6 from the United States, they're larger than countries.
Mhm.
And so we don't know how to govern them. So the challenge is just so difficult. And I don't think so. We'll talk about that. Our next webinar will be on digital ID and whether or not that is good given the privacy concerns.
Mhm.
And it seems probably obvious to almost everybody, but developing countries, especially authoritarian countries, are very attracted to digital ID. And while it can be a good thing, what are they doing with that data over the long term? So that'll be one thing. And then the other thing that I'm really interested in is undergoverned spaces. And so, like every day, I read something about how we're going to come up with rules to govern AI at the
Mhm.
OECD, or we're gonna come up with a shared approach to competition policy related to AI, because cloud companies and companies that have lots of economies of scale and scope and data, they have an advantage that may not be fair. But no one's talking about VR and AR.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
more governments are using virtual reality to solve problems, to train. And so I'd like to have a conference. Love to get your thoughts on, I haven't contacted anyone in Japan, but just because this is what I'd like to do, I haven't formalized it yet, but I'd like to have a conference on
Mhm.
virtual reality and how do you govern it? Because you may remember the Pokemon
Yeah.
incidents from, I think it was 2 years ago. Virtual reality forces you to rethink the whole notion of what is private property, what is personal. And I think it's going to require a very different approach to governance than, let's say, AI.
Mm.
Yeah, certainly AI can underpin virtual reality, but I
Mhm.
just think that is appealing to me because people aren't thinking about it yet, and they should. Now, do you
Okay.
govern it through data governance, or do you govern it through regulation of the technology or the sector? I don't have any answers to that, but that's interesting to me.
Mhm. Thank you. So in terms of the data governance, we have many aspects. Even though we use this word, maybe just the international discussions, but the problem is that we have different aspects. I suppose that I have my own data governance, you have your own data governance. So how we can take a balance to make an adjustment, even we have different languages that all together to come on board.
Yeah, that's a toughie. So, what I found is nations don't even share norms, let alone definitions for what is data governance. And I think the OECD is trying, and the UNCTAD, they're trying to come up with some definitions, but right now, data governance seems to be about personal data governance
Mm.
and not about its intersection with public data and proprietary data
Mhm.
and trade secrets. And I'd like to see more attention to that. And our questionnaire focuses on that. But I think it's really important because I think, if AI is going to help us solve wicked problems like
Mhm.
climate change or the spread of disease, public and private data are going to have to be shared. And it's got to be a two-way street. How do you govern that? I don't see enough people talking about that.
I understand.
You know, and then what you and I talked about before, when we talk about privacy, we're not just talking about privacy, we're talking about the big platforms business model. And to me, it's very bad to talk just about privacy, because privacy is not the only human right that is affected when our data, when we share our data with these companies in return for free services. It can also affect freedom of association and free speech online, and people's sense of autonomy and security. And those things are as important as privacy.
Yeah, I think some privacy extremists said that we have to protect our privacy emotionally. However, the problems now is that we have to take in balances. Even the privacy people said, from the society perspective, we have to be more safety in the data society, such as we have to commit such as the security, even it's just a little bit intrusive. We have to be protected our life. I assume that this is the balance is not be extremist. So that's the things is we have to make in a conversations and each parties to come together. So yeah, I suppose that you agree with that.
I've not heard that term before, privacy extremist.
Oh, is that kind of like the against of like collected anything, just
Oh,
the
okay.
emotional
Yeah.
reactions, right? But I think that this is the one way. But for the societies, we need to take more balances. Not just one way is good. It just in the societies, a variety of the people is living. We have a different ideas, background, experiences. So,
Yeah. Wow.
um, thank you. So let's move on to the next question. I'd like to explore with you about the transitions, especially the last years we have seen the big topics about the Chinese tech platformers. Good example is that TikTok has been very argument on the tables about from the United presidents. So I believe reading your articles, you said in the article that's from China. They supposed some security issues from the 2013. So I'd like to ask you about how has been the U.S. security and the personal data protection changed from the 2013, especially from China.
Well, I think the problem is really the United States doesn't have an effective approach to personal data protection. And to me, an effective approach is not just a law, you know, one law governing it. Right now, we have a sectoral approach and there's lots of gaps. But it's not just personal data protection. You have to address who gets to control and monetize that data. So the United States has not come to terms with that. And that's about competition policy, right? And it's about, now, the United States is actually very good. The FTC really does give sizable fines. But given the size of many of these companies, like today I just read Facebook, despite all the disinformation and all its problems, had a huge profit year. I mean, like something like, I should go and look up exactly, but it was something like 63% over the year before, which is astronomical. You know, they're just so profitable. And I would not want to stop innovation. I don't want to punish a company's success. But I also think that these companies are just too big. There comes a time, they're so much bigger than many nations put together, right? Bigger than, you know, Spain and New Zealand. And, you know, with Facebook has 2 billion customers, they own the internet. They are oligopolies. So they must be addressed. But then we started to see cyber theft of data of government officials, right, through that 2013 hack. And then there were lots of other hacks of hotel and healthcare. And it dawned on US national security officials that China was essentially one big platform with not only lots of data about the Chinese people, but lots of data about American people. And that data, when it is analyzed, is so valuable for national security reasons. So what was the US response? It was stupid. It banned apps instead of saying we need a better approach to personal data protection. Instead of looking at itself and saying, what can we do that changes the scenario? And we are still in this position. My big fear, I haven't expressed this out loud, so you'll be the first to hear it, is the United States could be very much hated for these platforms because they're doing bad things with the data when they sell it. They do a lot of good too. I do not want to diminish like the good that Google does in the world. And there is a lot of good. And same with Facebook, although I wouldn't go near that platform myself. But I do think we need to look deep and hard at what these platforms are doing. And China should do that too. You know, in some ways, China is an amazing country. It is so innovative in tech. And it deserves our admiration in that regard. But I do think the cooperation between business and government in China, because it is authoritarian, is very dangerous. And it's particularly dangerous when we don't know how to govern these. We've come full circle in the discussion when we don't know how to govern these firms, and they are so huge. Some say they may be ungovernable. And for those reasons, I think it's really, really important that the United States work with its allies and on all sorts of cooperative solutions to this.
Thank you. This year has started out the new presidency, the Biden administrations. From their perspective, they will change the relationship in between the China and the US in terms of the cybersecurity space, because in until the last 2 years, it's been a more strong approach. But they said it just to be a more cooperative, to take in the balances, to harmonize the operations. So is there any big announcement, any change stance against the Chinese platform to anything?
Well, first of all, there won't be the banning of the apps. I mean, that is just stupid. But a couple of things have already started to happen. So a Republican senator, Senator Grassley, has asked the U.S. International Trade Commission to examine whether censorship is a trade barrier. And so that is very important because that lays the groundwork for the EU, the United States, Japan, to challenge Chinese censorship, which undermines the ability of firms to fully participate in the Chinese economy, Japanese firms, Dutch firms, Guatemalan firms. But if censorship is a trade barrier, then so is disinformation or internet shutdowns. They all reduce the generativity of the internet and further fragment it. And so I hope, and that is not good for China either, you know, because China is exporting its services right now. I mean, people love WeChat. TikTok is fabulous. These are fabulous AI companies. And they deserve our admiration. But if they, you know, don't follow the rules, then it's a problem. They are also too big. But in any case, do I see the Biden administration changing this? The Biden administration can chew gum and jump and eat at the same time. Do you know that US expression? And so they will cooperate with China when it's needed, because we have to cooperate with China on things like the pandemic and climate change. And they will come down hard on China on some other things like human rights, like setting up fake islands in the South China Sea, you know, those kind of things. So I think you'll see a more nuanced policy and probably more effective. The problem is we can't keep changing this every 4 years or every 8 years. You know, China, that relationship is so important, just as our relationship with Japan is really important. We have to partner.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. We have to just collaborate to take some of the initiatives ongoing the data economies. Yeah, I want to succeed at these topics to the next as well. We have to commit more safer and protective data societies in next decades, because of the many tech companies, as you mentioned, like Facebook has a very strong powers. Back to the some years ago, the Cambridge Analytica issues, which is very influential for the citizen decisions, which is a very big challenges for the regulators. So my question is how we can take a balance is the norms and law, which is very big challenging topics for us, because a lot of the companies that try to take a self-regulations, just kind of to try to save the products to go to the market unless they are making a self. So this is the one approach, but the regulation is be more enforcement. Such as the GDPR is very strict, so that a lot of the company is very scared to launch any products. These things is not so good for the tech innovations. So how do you think we can take a balances, the laws or any other alternative choice for the next regulations?
Well, I think the United States is losing influence, so I think that will lead to compromise. So some areas where compromise is needed, and you know, like Facebook and Google say they want to be regulated. So voluntary standards are going to be useful for AI, and I'll give you an example of it. Firms should, you know, look, when I use a calculator, right, I'm automating a decision, but firms should be transparent when they use a bot, or when they use very sophisticated algorithms to determine access to education, credit, healthcare, and, you know, housing. Those are important things that I think maybe we don't regulate, but we need to be transparent about it. But I'm not in a school that says that algorithms should be made transparent, because that doesn't do anything. And they are proprietary. Not all of them. A lot of them are open source, but I just think that's not going to achieve the goal. It doesn't really explain the algorithm and what it does to average people. But I do think tech is moving faster than many people can comprehend. And you don't want to put in place regulation that stifles innovation. And there's lots of evidence that GDPR does do that. So I don't think GDPR is the answer. But what I like about GDPR is the focus on people. And that kind of has gotten lost in the United States. You know, the focus is on harms instead of users, how users can be harmed. But I think you need to, the focus needs to be on trust. And that is one thing that Europe says they're trying to do in their regulation. There's a trade agreement that tries to do that too in the digital area, and that's DIPA, the Digital Economy partnership agreement, which is between Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile. And Canada has applied to join it, and the UK says they want to join it. And I think in many ways that will surpass CPTPP, just because CPTPP is like an old school model trade agreement, and it doesn't do anything to address the things we talked about earlier. It says, enforce your own laws for spam, enforce your own laws for privacy, you know, enforce your own laws for competition policies, but that's not cooperation, and that doesn't build trust. And so the language of DEPA, I think, is really quite clever. It's a partnership, and that's what we need more of.
I see. Yeah, you quoted words, the trust. I suppose this is the one one topic that we have to convince what is the trust for the enterprises, for the consumers, for the societies. So what do you think is the critical factors to make a trust, especially the corporations, governments? We have many layers. So how we can take more trusted societies?
Get their money out of politics. That's one thing. I mean, you know, American and Chinese companies have way too much influence. And so that's one thing. They can use it for good in terms of development, but they can also use it for bad. Another thing is more transparency and accountability, better critical thinking skills. These are things that I think would help with understanding what data is doing in our economy. I just think change has happened so fast that we don't know how to keep up with it. And, you know, so that's why I think we need better education of what we do with computer code and what we do with our data. That's starting to happen, I think. You know, I could just see the difference between me and a colleague of mine who, you know, like he studied social science as well. He is an MA level person, and he's just more trained, you know, in computer code and analysis and programming. So, you know, there might be generational differences there too, not necessarily, but so I do think education is really key. And a feedback loop, you know, giving people a voice. So I'm a big fan of, you know, in that report on agile governance put out by the government of Japan, they talk a lot about crowdsourcing, using the internet to get more people involved in decision making and make it more rapid. The only thing wrong with crowdsourcing is it tends to be experts who are the people. But, you know, but that's to be expected. That feedback loop is people who already know something about it. But sometimes people are inspired to give voice on those things. And so I'm a big fan of crowdsourcing governance.
I see. In terms of crowdsourcing, I think the one big difference from the traditional decision making is just we can include the stakeholders from other countries as well, such as you can use the internet services, you can access to the different country citizens, such as you can work with the, even as staying in America, you can work with the European people, the Asian people as well. So what could be changed through those platforms? Just even the US regulations, the other countries, the citizen is coming and having any experiences, anything. So is there any change to expect it?
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know, but I'm hopeful. I mean, you know, I mean, Let's see, I'm just trying to think of the year. China revised its labor law. I think it was 2013. And I remember lots of people from around the world commented, and they did take into, here's this authoritarian government, but they did take those comments into account. And a couple of years ago, I wrote a paper using empirical research, and we looked at whether membership in the WTO had any effect on whether or not governments engaged in this feedback loop. And yeah, we did find that even governments like Saudi Arabia did it because the WTO regime required them to have a portal to comment on regulations in order to be a member of the WTO. So that feedback loop is essential to good governance. And if it's internationalized, it could do even more because it's a means of disseminating norms, just like a social network is. I'm a naive, silly person, but I believe more dialogue is better.
I see. So you suggest the dialogues. So who should be leading these dialogues? I think the international cooperation is very negotiable. Like in U.S. and China and Europe has their own stance against because they try to insist their own self benefits because it's a natural because they have their own responsibilities in the societies. Of course, Japan has their own stance. So who should lead and how they can make a balancing conversation in the international relationship?
Right. I think nations, I mean, it depends on the issue. You can't generalize, but we just did a paper on the WTO talks, and China never leads, which is interesting. It kind of bullies. The nations that lead in terms of trade talks are the small open economies like Canada. I wouldn't call Canada small, but it's small in population. It's a big economy, but small in population. New Zealand, Australia, more and more Singapore, which is interesting because I don't know, they're a strange democracy. I don't know what to call them. But they do play a real role in trying to foster openness and dialogue around the world. So in regard to your question, who should lead? I think it depends on the circumstance, but I think everybody should be heard.
Thank you. So yeah, lastly, I'm very happy to be given the message. I'm calling with you from Japan. Then this year is the time to fight against the COVID-19. Every country is going to suffer from this big pandemics, but we have to cooperate to not just only for the economic cooperation, but also it's just to be more the vulnerable societies worldwide. So I'm very happy to be given the message to the listeners from your parts.
Thank you.
Do you have any message for the listeners? Just to cooperate with Japanese government and Japanese people, maybe they're watching these interviews for them?
Be patient with us. We're a mess. I mean, the United States. But we will get our act together. Sometimes you have to be a mess in order to right things. And I think Confucian culture, in some ways, social harmony is a good thing. The United States is a country of people who like to speak out and, have strong opinions, even though they may not know anything about what they're talking about. And I think we really need to do a better job of listening to each other and actually hearing what people have to say So I just said two contradictory things. I said we need to listen to idiots, basically, but I also said that, we've got to get our idiots act together. So, but I think, a lot of the problem was that the president did a lot of things to undermine trust among Americans. And he basically tried to have a civil war and a coup. And that's left people pretty scarred. It's really scary. And I wonder if Japanese people can trust us after that, because they must think we're really divided. And that worries me a lot, because Japan and the United States depend on each other for mutual security. And there's just so much tension in Asia, between Japan and Korea, between, India and China. I don't know if you consider India part of Asia, but you know what I'm talking about. And the United States has the world's second largest military, and should be there to help keep the rule of law. And right now we got to work on the rule of law in the United States. So just be patient with us. That's my message.
Yeah, that's great message and very warmly to cooperate in this year. So yeah, Susan, thank you for having this time. It's a great talk with you. They keep talking together for the great collaborations for the great societies. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Kohei-san. See you soon.
Sure.
All the best. Bye.